Ready to like really use your imaginations today.
Always up for a challenge.
Okay, so get this. Our deep dive today, it's about a world where, get this, everyone looks exactly the same. I mean, identical.
Wow.
No variations, like, at all. We're talking a planet full of, well, copies.
That's a pretty wild concept to wrap your head around.
Right. And our sources for this, they go into some crazy possibilities like, okay, would there even be e-fashion? What about dating?
Yeah, how would that work?
Exactly. And then think about it. Would we finally, like, wipe out racism? But T, would that just create other kinds of bias, things we haven't even, like, thought of yet?
It's fascinating to consider.
It really is. So to help us unpack all of this, we've got an expert who can break down, like, what this would really mean. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to dive into this.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just jump right in. One source, it said that governments, they could become, like, super meritocratic, meaning the most skilled, intelligent people, they just naturally rise to power. Or we could even swing the other way, right? Toward, like, utopian ideals, almost like communism, where everyone shares everything equally because, well, everyone is physically the same.
I see.
So what are your thoughts on that? Are those outcomes actually, like, likely?
Well, it's interesting because both of those paths, they seem so opposite at first, but they come from the same root, I guess you could say.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. If there's no physical differences to base like social hierarchy on,
Okay.
then it kind of levels the playing field, right?
Yeah.
So in a purely meritocratic system, forget about charisma or, those photo ops politicians are always doing.
Oh, yeah.
It'll all be about your skills, your intellect. Can you prove it?
So elections would be like, what, tests?
Yep.
Public displays of confidence.
Potentially. Imagine having to actually prove you can do the job before you get elected.
That's so different from how things are now. It makes you think, would that even be fair, those kinds of tests? What if someone's brilliant, but they choke under pressure?
Excellent point. You've hit on something crucial there. A system that's purely meritocratic, it could end up favoring certain personality types or even just certain ways of thinking.
Right.
And then there's the question of, well, WHO designs the tests.
Yeah, good point.
And how do you make sure they're truly unbiased? I mean, even with systems that seem fair on paper, you always have that risk of unintended consequences.
Like, solving one problem just creates a bunch of new ones.
Often, yes.
And then, we have the other side of the coin, that utopian society thing from the source. Like shared resources, everyone working for the common good. Sounds very communistic almost.
I understand the comparison.
But, I mean, can that really work?
Yeah.
Wouldn't people just, I don't know, slack off? If it doesn't matter how hard you work, you get the same outcome as everyone else.
You've touched upon one of the biggest dilemmas in this whole thought experiment. It's that tension between, what individuals want versus what's good for everyone. That utopian idea on paper, it's appealing. But would it stifle individual drive, innovation?
If everyone's the same, A&D resources are equal, why push yourself harder?
Exactly. And that brings up another point. How much of our current world, our society, is built on competition, on individuals, striving to succeed?
Yeah. So if you take that away, what happens to motivation? Do people still achieve amazing things?
That's a great question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. Would we see more collaboration, people working together for that common good? Or would we see, stagnation as people just kind of lose that drive to excel? This thought experiment really highlights how complex these things are, how individual drive interacts with society as a whole.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked potential government changes, like the values of this society. But something that really struck me in the source, it was this idea of identity.
Ah, yes.
If everyone looks the same, how do you develop a sense of self? How do you even stand out?
Now, that's where things get really fascinating. The source suggests that we might see this rise in what they call hyper-individualism.
Hyper-individualism.
Right, meaning people would try to distinguish themselves through, their achievements, skills, hobbies. Maybe they have unique experiences or they're really good at something specific.
So it's like instead of your looks, it's what you do, what you're good at.
Exactly. Imagine a world where your identity, it's not tied to your appearance. It's tied to, your passions, your values, the things that make you, you.
So instead of fashion being about how you look, it's about, expressing your personality, your interests, beliefs. It'd be like wearing your soul on the outside.
Precisely. It's a mind-blowing concept to think about.
Yeah.
Fashion is a form of self-expression, but it goes way beyond just physical appearance. It's about reflecting your inner world, not conforming to some, external standard of beauty.
What would a fashion show even look like in this world?
Right. It's almost impossible to picture.
It really makes you think about how much of our identity, even NOW, is tied to looks. We spend so much time and money on clothes, hairstyles, trying to look a certain way. But in a world where everyone's identical, those things wouldn't matter.
It would be a complete reset.
It really would, like how we see ourselves and how we see each other.
And that's one of the most powerful things about this whole thought experiment, I think.
What do you mean?
It forces us to think what really matters, what makes us unique and valuable beyond our physical form. Imagine a world where you're judged not by how you look, but by your character, your skills, what you contribute to society.
That's pretty profound. But it also makes me wonder, how those judgments would work. Even now, people can be biased against certain personalities, or ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
So would we just create no-W forms of prejudice? Based on things like, I don't know, intelligence or how creative you are, or even your sense of humor.
You bring up a really insightful point. It highlights this fact, human bias runs deep. It might not be so easy to get rid of, even if we take away physical differences.
So you're saying even with everyone looking the same, true equality might not happen?
It's a tough thing to admit, but yeah. We might see these new hierarchies pop up based on things like intelligence, artistic talent, even something as seemingly trivial as what kind of music you like or what hobbies you have.
It's like we're programmed to find ways to divide ourselves, even when the differences are super subtle,
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? But it's important to recognize how complex human nature is. Even if we strip away the most obvious differences, we might still find those new ways to categorize each other, to judge. This thought experiment really pushes us to look at that, to think about how deeply ingrained bias is and how it might show up in ways we don't even expect.
Okay, so this is getting deep.
A little bit, yeah.
We've got these potential utopian societies, but then maybe that squashes individuality. Maybe we get rid of racism, but invent new biases we haven't even imagined. And then this whole thing about identity being totally different. What you do and what you think matters more than how you look.
A lot to consider.
It really is. It's a lot to process. But there's one thing I'm particularly curious about, and I bet our listeners are too. Love and relationships. Because in our world, looks play a huge role in who we're initially attracted to.
Right.
But if everyone's identical, how does that even work?
That's when things get really intriguing. The source suggests that attraction would basically become all about personality. Shared values, what your goals are. Emotional compatibility would be huge E.
So it's like the ultimate blind date.
Yeah.
Every single time.
In a way, yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, though? I mean, would relationships be more fulfilling just based on that deeper connection? Or would we kind of miss that, I don't know, that initial spark of physical attraction?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really makes you think about all the different parts of attraction, how they all play into, forming relationships and whether they last. Would a world without those physical differences lead to more meaningful connections, the kind that last, based on shared values, intimacy? Or would we see less romance? Because people just don't feel that spark.
I never thought of it that way. I guess you'd really have to get to know someone before deciding if you're attracted to them, huh?
That's a possibility, yeah.
Maybe relationships would develop slower, but then they're stronger in the long run, more resilient.
That's an interesting thought. And it challenges us to look at our own relationships, doesn't it? Think about that physical attraction. Is it really essential? Or is it something, society has kind of programmed us to think is so important?
I don't know if I have the answer to that one, but it's definitely food for thought.
Agreed.
Okay, so we've got these potential utopias, but maybe individuality suffers. We've got to focus on inner beauty, relationships based on pure connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to sound pretty idyllic, right?
It has its appeal.
Yeah, but not so fast. The source also pointed out some serious downsides, especially when it comes to jobs and, innovation.
Right. The potential for a super competitive job market is huge. Imagine everyone having the same potential, the same starting point. The only thing that sets you apart, your skills, education, your ability to, really innovate and stand out from that crowd.
Man, that sounds intense. Forget just good grades. You have to be like the top expert in your field just to compete. It's like everyone's playing the same instrument and you got to be a virtuoso just to get heard.
That's a fantastic analogy. And it really highlights the pressure to excel in that world. Your career success depends entirely on your ability to outperform everyone else who's just as capable as you.
It could be a recipe for burnout, for sure. But on the other hand, wouldn't that competition drive incredible innovation? Like, if everyone's pushing the limits, wouldn't we see these huge EE breakthroughs in science, tech, everything?
That's certainly a possibility. The source suggests that this hyper-competitive environment could lead to, like, an explosion of human progress. Think about it. Cures for diseases we think are incurable now. Technology that reshapes how we understand the universe. Art that, just blows our minds.
So it's a trade-off. Amazing progress, but at a cost. Constant pressure. Always comparing yourself to everyone else.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder what the impact would be, not just on society, but on individuals, mentally, emotionally. This thought experiment, it's not just about the structures of that world or the technology. It's about what it would do to people, the good and the bad.
Okay, so we've got this cutthroat job market, this constant pressure to, like, be the best.
Yeah.
And maybe incredible progress, but at what cost? Starting to sound less like paradise and more like, I don't know, pressure cooker.
Perhaps, but we can't forget the positives either. The source also mentions how this focus on inner qualities could lead to art and culture really flourishing. Self-expression taking off in ways we can't imagine. Imagine fashion isn't about showing off your body. It's about expressing your mind, your values, your unique perspective.
Now that's a fashion show I want to see. What would that even look like? No more models on the runway? It's like TED Talks with incredible outfits.
I love that image. And it gets to the heart of how culture could transform. Think about storytelling, music, even architecture. How would they change when physical appearance is irrelevant? Would we even have beauty standards anymore? Or would we come up with totally new ways of appreciating things, of expressing ourselves?
It's like our whole concept of art would be flipped upside down. Instead of judging a painting by how it looks, we'd be analyzing the ideas behind it, the emotions, the story. We'd be forced to look deeper, engage with art on a totally different level.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, it could lead to incredible new forms of art that we can't even fathom right now, a world where creativity is truly king and the human imagination is unleashed.
This is blowing my mind. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's get back to reality for a minute. I mean, even in a world where everyone's identical, I'm guessing there'd still be crime, right?
I think it's safe to assume that, yes.
But how do you catch a criminal when everyone looks the same? Fingerprints are useless, facial recognition, forget it. It's like the perfect disguise.
You've hit on a fascinating point. The source actually talks about how criminal justice would be completely different in this scenario. Forget relying on physical evidence. It's all about psychological profiles, digital footprints, maybe even technology that can analyze someone's intentions or predict their behavior.
So it's less about who done it and more about why did it.
Exactly. And that ties into another interesting point from the source. The focus might shift from punishment to rehabilitation.
Oh, how so?
Well, if everyone looks the same, there's no physical difference to use to, stigmatize people. So maybe there'd be a bigger emphasis on understanding why crimes happen, addressing mental health issues, helping offenders become part of society again.
So instead of prisons, we'd have therapy centers, rehab facilities, but for, like, emotions.
It's a possibility. And it really makes us think about the purpose of our justice system as it is now. Is it about revenge? Or is it about making society safer, healthier?
This whole deep dive is making me question everything. Okay, so to recap, we've got potential utopias, focus on inner beauty, crime solved by basically reading people's minds. Is this starting to sound more like paradise? Or more like some kind of dystopia? I can't decide.
And that's the brilliance of this whole thought experiment. It's not about getting a right or wrong answer. It's about debate, challenging what we think we know, making us look at our own WN values.
So it's less about what if and more about what do we want.
Precisely. What really matters, to us personally, to us as a society, would getting rid of physical differences solve all our problems? Or would it just create a whole new set of issues?
Well, we've covered a ton in this first part of our deep dive, but there's still so much more to explore. We've only just started to scratch the surface of what life would really be like in this world where everyone looks the same.
So before we got sidetracked talking about crime and all that, you were asking about education.
Oh, right. It's
What?
crazy how this one idea, everyone looking identical, just leads to so many other questions.
It really does.
But yeah, education, one source, it said that school would become like even more important because it's the main way to set yourself apart. If you can't stand out based on how you look, your education becomes like your badge of honor.
I think that's a really compelling point. In this world, everyone would be starting with essentially the same physical potential.
Right, right.
So your knowledge, skills, your qualifications, those would be the main things that show what you're capable of.
It makes sense.
Schools and universities, they could become the ultimate testing grounds. Not just shaping your career, but like your whole identity.
I can see how that would be motivating for some people. But what about, the people who don't do well in normal schools, or those who figure out what they're passionate about later in life? Would they be at a disadvantage?
That's a valid concern. This hyper-focus on education, it could create a lot of pressure to succeed starting really young.
Yeah.
The source did mention that maybe learning would become more personalized, tailored to what you're good at, what you're interested in.
Oh, okay.
But even then, there's a risk of, putting people into boxes too soon.
Right, right.
It makes you think about how we define success in the first place, and if there's room for people who don't fit neatly into that definition.
Yeah, even in a world without physical differences, we'd still have to be careful not to create new systems that accidentally favor some people over others. But speaking of systems, what about the role of technology in all of this? The source material, it had some pretty wild ideas about how tech could be used to express your individuality, even though everyone looks the same.
That was a fascinating part of the research. Remember, we're imagining everyone looks identical, so technology becomes this main outlet for showing who you are.
Okay, yeah.
Think about it. Wearable tech that displays your achievements, or gadgets that are personalized to your interests. You could even have digital avatars that show off your personality.
It's like tech becomes, part of you, like an extension of yourself, a way to show your inner world to everyone else.
Exactly.
That's both super cool and kind of creepy, to be honest. Would you really want everyone to know everything about you all the time?
That's a great question.
Where's the mystery, the intrigue? And what about privacy?
It's easy to get caught up in the shiny new tech, but you're right, there are downsides. This kind of transparency could totally erode privacy.
For sure.
And create new pressures socially. Imagine feeling like you have to constantly show off your accomplishments or keep updating your digital self just to keep up with everyone else.
Yeah, it would be exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about, being genuine? How would you know if someone's online persona is really them or just some fake idealized version?
It really blurs the lines between who you are in real life and who you are online.
Big time.
This thought experiment, it makes us think about more than just the technology itself, right?
Yeah.
It's about the ethics of it all, the social impact. If tech is mediating so much of how we interact, how do we keep things real? How do we have genuine connections?
It's like we'd need a whole new set of rules, for how to behave in this super tech-driven world.
You're right. But okay, beyond self-expression, the source also talked about tech's role in driving innovation. And it seems like in this world, the competition would be even crazier, right? Leading to advancements in all sorts of fields at warp speed. Absolutely. If everyone's physically the same, the pressure to stand out through what you achieve, through your contributions, would be immense. Think about fields like AI, biotech, space exploration. Those areas could see breakthroughs faster than we've ever imagined.
So it'd be like a global brain race. Everyone trying to come up with the next big thing, the next big discovery.
Exactly. And that kind of intellectual competition, it could be amazing for progress.
Right.
But it brings up some important questions, too. What happens to the people who don't keep up in this race?
Yeah, good point.
And ethically, are there lines we shouldn't cross, even if the tech lets us? Especially in stuff like genetic engineering or AI, where the potential is so huge.
It's true. Progress shouldn't come at the cost of ethics or the well-being of people who get left behind. This thought experiment really makes you think about unintended consequences, no matter how good something sounds at first.
Absolutely.
But okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about something a little more personal, family. Because if everyone's identical, what happens to sibling rivalry? Would it even exist?
Now, that is an interesting question. A lot of sibling rivalry, it comes from competing for things, right?
Yeah.
Resources, attention, trying to figure out your own identity. But if everyone looks the same and those basic needs are met equally, would those rivalries disappear?
I don't know. Even identical twins in our world, they can be super competitive, even though they have the same genes, same upbringing.
That's true. The source suggests that in this world, sibling relationships would probably be more about who you click with intellectually, emotionally.
Yeah.
Not so much about physical differences or who gets more stuff. It'd be less about who's taller or who gets the bigger bedroom and more like who's better at chess or who's got the most creative ideas.
So sibling rivalry maybe wouldn't go away, but it'd be different.
Potentially, yeah.
A battle of minds instead of like a physical fight. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it pushes siblings to, develop their talents, their skills.
Competition, when it's healthy, can be a great motivator.
Sure.
And it makes you wonder if those rivalries, even if they're more intellectual, would still be balanced out by that love, that support, that shared history that siblings have.
Yeah. Even when they fight, siblings usually have each other's backs. And maybe that bond would be even stronger in this world where you literally share the same DNA. It's like ultimate kinship.
It's fascinating to think about.
It really is. A world where family isn't so much about blood, but about shared experiences. Who you connect with mentally, emotionally. It almost makes you wonder if those bonds, without all the comparisons, all the traditional ideas about family, if they might actually be deeper, more meaningful.
It's a compelling idea.
It is. But speaking of meaningful connections, we've been talking about all these different parts of this world: government, identity, relationships, family. And one thing that keeps coming up is, how do we define ourselves in a world where everyone looks the same? How do we find our place?
You're absolutely right. That's a core question that runs through this whole thought experiment. It's not just about imagining no physical diversity. It's about looking at our own biases, our assumptions about what identity even means, about what really matters when you take away those superficial differences.
It's like we've been looking at humanity through this warped lens in this thought experiment. It helps us see things we might have missed otherwise.
I like that analogy. And maybe, in that warped reflection, we can see glimpses of a better way. A future where we focus on what we share, on our good qualities, on being kind and understanding, instead of getting hung up on how we look.
That's a nice thought. But I still have this feeling that even with everyone looking identical, new problems would pop up, new divisions. It's like conflict is just part of who we are, no matter how hard we try to get rid of the things that separate us.
That's a very valid point. The source material even touches on that. It says that even without physical differences, we might fight over ideas, over resources, or just because humans want power, they want to be recognized. It seems like utopia is kind of elusive.
So maybe it's not about getting rid of all differences. It's about learning to handle them, to be okay with different opinions, to find ways to get along, even when we disagree.
Well said. And that speaks to the importance of communication, of thinking critically, and of being willing to challenge what we believe, even in a world that seems perfectly uniform.
True equality isn't about everyone being exactly the same. It's about everyone having a chance to, be their best selves and contribute what makes them special.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us back to one of the most powerful things about this whole thought experiment.
What was that?
The focus on what's inside. What we bring to the table, not what we look like. It's like this challenge to focus on the things that really matter. Our character, our values, how creative we are, how compassionate, how well we connect with others.
It's like a reminder that real beauty isn't about looks. It's about how rich and complex our inner world is.
Exactly.
And we're back. Man, this deep dive into a world where everyone looks exactly the same, it's been a real trip, hasn't it? Makes you think about so much.
It has. We've been through potential utopias, dystopias, thought about identity, love, justice, the whole shebang.
Yeah. But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about this thought experiment. It's not about finding the right answer. It's more about, looking at our own values.
Exactly.
So what are some of the big things you've taken away from this? What really stands out to you?
I think for me, it's realizing how much of what we think is just normal or inevitable is actually stuff we've made. Our social rules, cultural norms, even our physical differences. They all shape how we see the world. This thought experiment, it kind of strips all that away, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And it forces us to look at what's really at the core of being human. What drives us, what connects us, what makes us, us.
It's like we've been looking at humanity through this funhouse mirror,
Yeah.
All distorted. And that distortion, it helps us see things in a new way, things we might have missed before.
I love that analogy. And maybe, in that distorted reflection, we can see a better future, One where we focus on our shared humanity, the good in people, being compassionate, understanding, instead of getting hung up on how we look different.
That's a really nice thought. But I still can't shake this feeling that even if everyone was identical, New problems would come up. We'd find new ways to divide ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like conflict is just baked into being human, no matter how hard we try to, like, smooth everything out.
You're not wrong to feel that way. The source material, it even says this, even without physical differences. We'd probably fight over ideas, over who gets what resources. Just the fact that humans want power, they want to be in charge. It kind of messes things up. It seems like utopia, true utopia, is really hard to achieve.
So maybe it's not about getting rid of all of that forces, Maybe it's more about figuring out how to deal with them, to be okay with people having different opinions, to cooperate, to coexist, even when we disagree about stuff.
I think that's a really profound insight. It speaks to the need for constant communication, for thinking critically about things, and for being willing to, question our own beliefs, even in a world that seems perfectly the same.
Yeah, true equality. It's not about making everyone identical. It's about making sure everyone has a chance to, be their best selves, to contribute what makes them unique.
You nailed it. And that brings us back to one of the most, hopeful parts of this whole thought experiment.
What's that?
The focus on inner qualities, what we have to offer, not just how we look. It's like this challenge to us to really value things like character, values, creativity, kindness, the ability to connect with each other on a deeper level.
It's like saying, hey, real beauty isn't skin deep. It's about what's going on inside.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've spent all this time in this world of identical humans. It's been, well, mind-blowing to say the least.
I agree.
We've seen utopias, dystopias, thought about what it means to be a person, to love, to find justice, the whole gamut. But as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one last thing to ponder.
What's that?
The source material, it said that even in a world of perfect copies, tiny differences, they'd still pop up over time. Because of the environment, random stuff in our genes, even choices people make.
It's true. Even in a world that seems totally the same, change is going to happen.
It always does.
And those little differences, they could lead to new kinds of diversity, new ways for humanity to evolve. It'd be a whole new chapter in our story.
So maybe this thought experiment, it's not just about some made-up future. Maybe it's about, what it means to be human, period. How we adapt, how sameness and difference are always pushing and pulling, shaping the world around us.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It makes you think. Well, on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye to this world of identical folks. Thanks for coming along on this journey with us. And of course, huge thanks to our expert for helping us explore all these mind-bending ideas.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. And hey, listeners, remember, the world is full of crazy questions, amazing possibilities. So keep exploring, keep asking what ifs, and never stop being amazed by, being human. Catch you next time on The Deep Dive.